there is a mask that I have had to wear in certain rooms to be able to quote unquote do my job. There was a certain persona and a role you had to play to be in those rooms that felt very misaligned with my values. And I think that's what I mean by you had to mask up and then you had to kind of come clean and unfold in other rooms where it was safe.
That's Tara Goldman. She's the former VP of Product turned executive coach. And in addition to being a certified coach for tech leaders, she also co-founded a consultancy called GoldHue, which helps founders and tech leaders with the how-to of product management. If you're new here, my name is Andrew Kaplan, and this is a show where I get to have candid conversations about some of the toughest moments in my guest careers. And in my conversation with Tara, we covered a few of hers, like how nervous she felt the first time presenting to a board as an executive, how she worked through the fear and imposter syndrome of a big promotion at work, and the struggle to detangle her professional identity and the wins and failures that come with that from her personal self. But personally, my favorite part of this conversation was getting to explore how she would coach someone else who's encountering these same types of challenges. There's a ton to relate to and take away from this episode. You're going to love it. Let's go ahead and jump right in.
Born and raised in northern New Jersey as a first gen to immigrant parents from Israel. In fact, my first language was actually Hebrew, even though I was born here. And I went to preschool not knowing much English, or rather like being more conversational in another language, which is really interesting. I loved reading. I loved puzzles, which is really interesting given that I ended up in the product space. And pretty like typical childhood. I had the privilege of traveling a lot given we had family abroad. And grew up in a very tight-knit family. It was important for us to come together at least once a week, an extended family. My grandparents lived really close by, and they played a very active role in raising us as my parents were entrepreneurs and were working 24/7, still do. So really healthy, typical sort of like upbringing and a big kind of family component.
And what did your parents do? You mentioned they were both entrepreneurs. What were their businesses?
My mom actually started her career in real estate after she had me, and she was an arts major. So she went to the High School of Arts and Design in Manhattan and then studied film in college. And then when she had her first child, said, let me give it a go with real estate, which I would say a lot of people go and get their real estate license, and 97% of real estate agents are not necessarily like career kind of like successful businesses, but rather do it on the side. She was that 1% that built a very successful business over the past 40 plus years. And she started out when I was just a child, and she built out a great team, and she invested in marketing and, digital super early. So she really kind of loved learning and development. So was always at conferences looking to better herself. So I kind of had that already as a role model of someone who really set the bar higher and higher every year and was very self-motivated. On the flip side, my father is still in the travel industry. And so built out like a corporate travel agency and does some personal as well. So both of them lifelong entrepreneurs. Nobody worked in corporate in my family, which is interesting because that was my path initially. And then we can talk later about where I'm at today and how it kind of makes sense to me now.
Cool. And what did you think you were going to do? Like if we could go back in time and we talk to one of your high school or early stage friends, the one that really get your essence, how would they have described you and what did you think you were going to grow up and become?
So this was an interesting question because I didn't really know. I think when I was younger, I thought maybe lawyer, but then I was someone who was always interested in a lot of different things. Even when I went to college, I found a way to major in like a generalist kind of program where I could take classes in anthropology and economics and like literally one of everything. And somehow I got accounted for a major. And even coming out of college where I went, while it was liberal arts, at the time you went to investment banking, you went to law school, or you went to med school. And then there was me. Like, is there something wrong with me? And I think when I look back, it was more, I wanted to explore different types of things. I don't think I necessarily understood what a job could really look like until I was actually there. And that's kind of been I've been more of that generalist person, where even in my product career, I wasn't someone who went super deep. And, I am an SME in fintech. I've bopped around in B2C, B2B, different industries, public, early stage, mid stage, late stage, kind of all different things. And I think different things appeal to me at different times. And that's kind of what I like.
And so what's your path from liberal arts into the world of product management and eventually product leadership? Maybe just tell us your first couple of steps in there.
When I graduated, product was not a thing. There was no such thing at the time. And I was really interested to get involved in what was then digital, right? So I started in email marketing. I then expanded into digital advertising agencies in New York City. And I kind of fell in love with building products and figuring out how to drive value for businesses. However, I quickly realized that on an agency side, you don't know what's going to, you kind of like give it back to the client and hope for the best. And at that point, I realized I didn't want that. I wanted to own it. I wanted to grow it. I wanted to make it better. And so I pivoted to in house and started in the ed tech space, moved into kind of health and wellness, back to ed tech, to IT. And what I loved was being able to come in and really put a fingerprint on something and, drive it forward. I think about my career in different stages. There was the era of product bootcamp. What does it mean to do product really well? Then there was the era of leadership and inheriting teams. And how do you lead product teams? How do you think about growing people? How do you think about hiring? How do you think about managing out? Which then led me into what is it to be an executive at a company, which is leveling above your function and really thinking about the organization as a whole, because you have, a responsibility to that company at that level versus, kind of the first team approach, not your function of where you come from, but really, I am now an owner here. And how do I think about this from that lens and be a partner with my peers to make everything happen?
And you know what's cool? You talked about early when you were a kid, you said, well, maybe I'd grow up and become a lawyer. And then you kind of get into product and eventually leadership, where a lot of it, I think, you can tell me if you disagree, I think a lot of it's a very similar skill set, which is how do you know? How do I prove my case? How do I defend my dissertation? I've got to present this thing to other people. They might have different opinions. Do they sway me or do I hold my ground? How do I hold my ground? How do I make an argument in a case? One, do you agree? And two, if you do agree, where does that skill set come from? Because it sounds like that was in you from a young age.
That's a really interesting perspective that no one's ever pointed out before. I do think that that is one of the hardest skills in product management. And I think a lot of people gravitate towards product where they say, I want to make the calls and it's glamorized. And I am that person who, if people want to get into product, I'm more than happy to chat. But I'm also the person to convince them why it's literally the worst decision for them to make. And then if they still really want to do it, then let's talk. But that is a reality, right? No one is ever happy. And your job is to align, collaborate, compromise, and really understand what are people's motivations? What do they have to get done? What's in it for them? How do you frame something in terms that people will care about and understand? I think that's the thing people get wrong in these roles. You can't talk about product speak. We almost have to be multilingual. And you need to be able to speak in terms of, if you're talking to the CFO, what is the vocabulary that's going to resonate with that person versus you're talking with the CRO? Anybody in the go-to-market side, what are they incentivized by? Okay, that's very clear, right? How do you tweak your language and figure out a way to work in partnership? And I do think that when I think lawyer, I think, like you said, like defense and all these hard things. But there is a translation here because there's a lot of understand your audience, be able to frame up a tight, crisp case in a way they're going to literally hear, which most people shut down after 7 seconds, and want to partner with you because they see, oh, this is not your typical product person who's going to be like, this is my roadmap. You can't touch it. This is what we're building. Don't come at me with your requests. And really be not just a thought partner, but someone who is aligned to the same goals. More importantly, should be and incentivized toward the same goals and be seen as a team. Because I think for too long, we've been very siloed. Even in smaller companies, you're siloed to your function because we're incentivized by different things. And if we can see that we are actually all on the same team here and want the same outcomes, it becomes a very different conversation.
You said something really interesting, which is most people think when I get the title, when I become director or the head of, and whatever that title is, then I'll be influential and people will listen to me and they'll trust my decision-making and my roadmap. And what I've learned is it's kind of backwards, where it's like you actually kind of need to learn how to make a case, how to defend a case, how to present an argument, how to translate your ideas for non-native speakers. And that's what leads you to a leadership position. But if you get the title without having that skill set, it ends up being really challenging. It's not like magically you have more influence when you get a certain title. You need to learn how to influence and how to translate. And what I'm hearing you say is, on some level, you learned how to do that at a young age, or maybe that was an inherent skill set that got developed along the way, perhaps.
Yeah. And I do think that when you're in a product role, even as an IC level, that is your job, right? It's a lot of leading without authority. And it's one of the hardest things you have to do. And you can talk to me all day about, how to build great products and, all the hard skills that you can learn in boot camps. But what you can't learn in those boot camps is this skill set, which is how do you motivate people? How do you compromise? How do you get people aligned to your vision, bought in, and want to get it done? And to your point, that is leadership, and it doesn't necessarily need to be tied to a title. Some of the best examples of this that I have seen are at every level of an organization. And the qualities that I see is that these people are not coming with problems, they're coming with solutions. They're saying, hey, here's what I see. It's an opportunity. Here's what I think we should do about it. I love those people. You know why? Every leader loves those people. Less work for us. Basically, high leverage, right? They're coming because they know it better. Like we're sometimes so far removed at the top that our teams are much more well suited to come up with better ideas and better solutions. I'm thinking about a couple of folks who have, I've had the privilege of working with, and I loved it because they would come to me and say, this is what we need to do. Here's why. I'm like, great, go do it. And to me, that's leadership.
Many of us learn this the hard way, which is we become a leader and we make some mistakes, and those mistakes feel really painful because we feel like I shouldn't be making these mistakes. And so, I want to dig into some of yours and how you learned some of this stuff along the way. So obviously you've gone on to have, from the outside looking in, a very successful and impressive career. So I'm curious if we could rewind the clock a little bit. Can you tell us about a challenging moment, maybe earlier or mid-stage in your career, that ended up being a moment of tremendous personal growth as you reflect back on it?
When people hear me speak or kind of talk to me, they think, well, she doesn't have problems with confidence or imposter syndrome or any of that stuff. But there was definitely a moment, and I would say it was an inflection point in my career, where I had the privilege of meeting somebody early on when we worked in agency days. And we somehow navigated or found each other again at a tech company. And we worked as peers early on in my career. And then I ended up working for this individual. And long story short, we were the kind of duo where we'd come in to organizations as sort of the new guard, and there'd be problems and we'd had to fix it or transform the organization or the team, right size it, and then go and do it again. And we did it several times. And what I didn't realize until this inflection point was I think I tied a lot of my value and worth to this individual. And so I didn't necessarily, there came a point where, let's just call, one of our stints were over, and we were both thinking about what was next. What is our next chapter? And the conversation that was had was, hey, Tara, I think you actually need to do this on your own and do my job somewhere else, like be in the number one seat, stop being number two. And that was a really hard thing for me to hear because I had told myself, nope, that is not me. I am the number two. I get it done. I am somebody's right hand and I don't want that life. Like all this narrative speak that I had already come up in my brain. My old boss said, no, like you have now gotten so close. Like I can't bring you with me anymore. This doesn't make any sense. And that was a really hard time for me. And some people would have seen that as a huge opportunity, been so excited. And I was terrified because the story I told myself was, am I capable of landing a job on my own? Because, while I interviewed and got those roles, there was a part of me that said that person was always on the other side and they were probably advocating for me. And so the story I told myself was, you may not be capable of landing a job by yourself in an organization where you do not know a single human person on the other side. And it was a journey. And I think for me, I had to go through that. Like it was a very pivotal moment. And of course, everyone around me said, you're insane. Of course, you're going to. And of course, like a month and a half later, I had multiple offers from a couple of different startups, but it was hard. And so I had to think about, what does this look like for me on my own? What do I care about? And looking back, what was really positive was I was vetting companies and roles based on what I wanted, where I think prior, I may have clouded that a little bit too much by going towards someone I had worked with before. Not to say there weren't positive things that I was excited about in those opportunities, but I could get really specific about this is just me now. What do I care about? And I think that was huge.
And in retrospect, was this tremendous awareness of what got me here won't get me there? I don't know if I have the skill set to do this next level. Or was it, hey, I'm scared because where I'm playing feels safe and this other thing is unsafe and I'm scared of this unknown thing or something different, but I'm just projecting a little bit here.
I think it's the latter because I think I felt like I always had a safety net and it felt safe without me acknowledging or realizing that it was safe until it was gone.
And so you're feeling this resistance, right? As a side note, have you read the book, The Big Leap with Gay Hendricks? It's got the picture of the goldfish jumping to the bigger goldfish tank on the cover.
I haven't, but you're the second person to recommend that to me recently.
Ooh, all right. Well, the universe is speaking to you. It's exactly what you're talking about. It's these subconscious things that we do to keep ourselves from playing bigger, to keep ourselves in a smaller fish tank, so to speak, because we're more successful there and we're more comfortable there. How do you break through that? So there's a lot of folks that are listening to this that have their version of this, where there's some opportunity that part of them is excited about, that knows, geez, if I do this, it could unlock so many doors, but it's a huge risk and it's scary. And so I'm curious how you work through it. And then also if there's someone listening to this, how you might coach them to work through it.
So I think first and foremost, I don't believe that it's easy to do this alone. And I think it's important, people call it your board of directors, whatever, whoever those people are that are in your inner circle from a professional perspective and can be your cheerleaders, can be your harshest critic. They can each play a different role, I think is critical because anytime you're doing something for the first time and it seems terrifying and it's a new environment, you may not know anybody, you really need to have that around you to remind you, what are my strengths? Like, what are my superpowers? What do I bring that's unique to the table? And have someone remind you of that because there are very, very hard days and experiences where it will bring you down. And, if you say, well, like you're just lying, especially in tech, it's just a day can be a roller coaster and you can have 3 of them where you have high highs and low lows before noon. And so I would say that's really important. What I cared about the most in the opportunity that I ended up finding was who I was going to be working with. And I compromised on other things because to me, I wanted to be in a place where I was going to find that. And I feel like I chose correctly because these people that I had the privilege of working with, and I've been long gone, are still some of my closest friends and sit on my now board of directors. And when I think back to even my early days of onboarding into a new organization where I didn't know anybody and there were high expectations and a lot of pressure, these people, were just so open and supportive and very positive, where it felt like it was a place where you were going to win, where even if you didn't know what you were capable of or if you could do it, people would, you got this, you're good, right? So then you think, yeah, I do. It's all good. Instead of the questioning, I think the language we use and I think the environments create matter so much. And if you have a culture of hyper scrutiny or just constant interrogation that you can feel the tension and it's palpable, it really impacts people's ability to unlock kind of what you said, be capable of these things. Whereas if you have an environment of full support, positive, encouragement, and just saying, just try something, who cares? Imagine the difference in what they're able to produce. So I would say who you surround yourself with is so important. I think, people say this all the time, like you are, what is it, the 3 to 5 people who you spend the most time with? It's true. And so if you're going to be around people who are going to amp you up, pump you up, and reinforce your differentiators, you're probably going to be good. If you don't have people, it's going to be very lonely and hard. To the second point, I think that is exactly what I do in my coaching, because when we are, when we're kind of in our tunnel vision and we're in those moments, and let's be real, it's been tough out there, right? So to say it's wartime, it's really hard at every organization, whether you are the one left after all the rifts or if you have been looking for a role. I know several of my friends have either just found roles or are still searching a year later. It's really, really hard. So either you're feeling the pressure internally or you're feeling like, I can't take another rejection or, from job searching. It's the same thing. It's how can you take them out of that headspace and that mindset and shift their perspective and remind them of, you said in the beginning, we are multiple people. We are human beings. And even in the work experience, you cannot separate who you are intrinsically from a professional setting. So how can we identify who are those multiple people inside you, right? And so if the person showing up in that moment is the dejected one or the one who's feeling imposter syndrome, let's name them and let's identify who that one is. And then let's talk about the other ones. And let's especially focus on the ones when you felt your best, when you felt like you were performing at your highest and you felt proud and confident. And let's name that person. And let's talk about what it feels like to be that person. And if somebody tells you that you can just get rid of your imposter syndrome and just totally mute the former, it's impossible. We are human. But what we can do is lower their volume and take them off stage sometimes and put the second person, right? The confident one, the firm one, whoever we want to be at our highest and best selves. And can we give them the lead role today? What does that feel like? And then can we think about the different perspectives and the different ways of looking at whatever our challenges are at the moment from that person's point of view? It entirely shifts the conversation.
I did this exercise when I worked with a coach at one point, and it changed my life. Actually, I don't know if you can see in the background, but there's a skateboard that I have over there. I don't know if you can see it or if it's slightly off camera. The name that I gave the best version of me, or one of the best versions of me, is Happy Bruce Wayne, because nobody fucks with Bruce. The guy is slick. He's suave. He's never flustered. He doesn't always have the answer, but he's not stressed over it. But he's a little serious. So Happy Bruce is my name, and I have the board back there, which is like a physical trigger for me to help get into that state. So I think those are great pieces of advice that I've personally benefited from. One of the other things I was curious about, so you take this new role, and for anyone listening, they could be in their new role, and now you're in a bigger fish tank. So when that happens, the ratio of things that you're confident in to things you haven't done before shifts. And so you get in this place where you're doing a lot of new things for the first time, and that's when you grow a lot. And usually you grow because you make a error and then you course correct. But if you're not careful, you end up feeling like you're just making a bunch of mistakes. And so what kind of evidence should someone look for if they're in a bigger fish tank, they've just taken this leap like what you did, that they're on the right track, even if they're making those mistakes along the way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think regardless of what function you're in or what level you're at, you need to be really clear on what success looks like. And you need to have those conversations really early with whoever your manager is, right? Because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn from them. But if you don't know where the goalposts are, it can feel like you're just doing somersaults and going down these meandering paths. And then, is this good? I don't know. Is that good? Am I doing the right thing? I'm not quite sure. And I'm going to be honest, like not every leader is a great leader. Not every leader, I'll just say, has the training or the experience to lead other humans yet. So I think sometimes, while frustrating, you may need to be the person to drive those conversations and say, what's important to you? Here's what I'm going to be focusing on, and have the conversation of, what does feedback look like? How do you like to give feedback? How do you like to receive feedback? A lot of people shy away from it. Many people are non-confrontational, and then you dance around it. Or you get the opposite where it just comes out in a burst because people have been holding on to it for a very long time. And I think the worst, and then that leads to bad things. But what I would say is, especially, I talk about this a lot with senior leaders and CEOs, but it applies to everybody. Have those conversations early. It's a relationship just like any other relationship. And can you get grounded in not just success, but what's important to you? What are things that annoy you? Like, I had a manual of, what I cared about and who I was, because when you're in a growth stage startup, let's be real, I was hiring like crazy. And there was a point where I had to onboard 3 leaders at the same time. And I thought, there's no way I can spend enough time with each of them while also doing my job. And I thought, you know what? I've always loved those. I think it started in engineering, right? Like the README files, but I made the TLDR version because nobody likes to read. And I shortened it to, a working with me doc. And then I asked my directs to also write them because there were things I didn't even know, even if I'd been working with them for a while, until they put it in writing. And I think what we tend to do is we do this trial and error kind of dance for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and we try to figure people out by just doing instead of saying, hey, you know what's most important to me is communication and alignment. What I care about is that you do what you said you were going to do. And what erodes my trust is when you don't do that. So every time like that happens, there could be people who are like, oh, it's no big deal. Like I didn't get that thing to her. And I'm like, yeah, but after you do that 10 times, then I start to dig in. And that's why. Right. And so really understanding what motivates people, what drives them. Some people actually don't like public accolades. Right. And understanding, hey, when you do a great job, like how do you want to be rewarded? Well, don't congratulate me in a Slack channel because I hate that. Oh, good to know. We tend to default to those things. So I think, just really understanding, going back to the human level, who are we individually? What motivates us? And getting that out in the open early really helps to, I think, cut through the tension and kind of de-escalate what can feel like a very high stakes environment in your first 90, 180 days where you feel like, I know I always felt like I have to prove something. I have to get wins on the board. And in my head, I think everything will be great in 6 months. But I often wonder, like, why do we have to go through that every time? That proving ground over and over and over again.
I talk to a lot of folks who are scared to do that. They think, well, no one's pulled me aside and told me this stuff, so I'm just going to keep going. And maybe they work for a founder or a CEO or whomever their boss is that maybe has never gone through that leadership training. And so they're scared to manage up a little bit. And so I think that that's great advice. The README file, I love that. This episode of the show is brought to you by Navattic. In fall of 2024, Navattic just launched their free plan, which allows product-led SaaS businesses like yours to publish and share interactive demos. So I was super excited to have Natalie, who's their head of growth, come back on the show. She's been on before to tell us all about the decisions that happened to enable the freemium launch. Because after being sales-led for 3 years, there were a ton of details to detangle, and we explored them all. Why freemium versus free trial, how this fits into Navattic's strategy, how they were able to get sales and customer success on the same page, their rollout plan, and of course, the KPIs they're using to track success. Subscribers to the show will remember that back in May, I actually published an 8-part interview series with Natalie and her colleague Raman from the Navattic growth team. And in that series, we talked about if freemium might be a part of Navattic's future. At the time, it was still in the idea phase. So this was a major update. In the conversation, we covered a ton of ground. It's going to be interesting and educational for anyone thinking about launching freemium or anyone who's already running a freemium program today that wants to see under the hood of another business. Catch our entire conversation either on my YouTube channel, just look for the behind the scenes playlist on my main page, or by searching for behind the scenes on any of the major podcast platforms under the Delivering Value podcast umbrella. I hope you enjoy. This episode is presented by Appcues. If you work in product-led growth, you know how important activating and engaging new accounts is. Turning new accounts into active users is critical to your success in a PLG environment, and typically why activated accounts is a North Star metric for growth teams. It's why my team spent years focused on improving our new user onboarding experience during my time at Wistia and at Postscript. And that's why I'm so excited that Appcues is sponsoring the show. They're just as passionate about helping product-led companies fix their onboarding and their retention as I am. They're the leading product onboarding and adoption platform for web and mobile apps, and they've helped over 1,500 SaaS orgs create exceptional onboarding experiences that convert new users into power users and brand advocates. So if you're looking for help activating more new accounts, head to appcues.com/value. They have a free new user onboarding audit, which is done by Ramli John. He literally wrote the book on new user onboarding, and he's a close personal friend of mine. For help, head to appcues.com/value. I want to loop back to something you said a few minutes ago. I wrote it down because I thought it was interesting. You said, I talk to people now who assume because I'm able to project confidence that I never feel lack of confidence. I'm paraphrasing, but you said something like that. And I'm curious if that's been a learned skill for you.
That's a really interesting insight.
Because there's a lot of people listening to this that wish that they could project more confidence. And so I'm curious to know if it's something that we can learn, and if so, how you learned it might be helpful to others.
It's a really good point. I do think that it is a learned skill and that there is a mask that I have had to wear in certain rooms to be able to quote unquote do my job.
Can you elaborate on what the mask means to you?
Yeah, I think you want the unvarnished version.
Yeah, I want the raw truth, because people who are listening to my show are feeling the other side of this, which is things aren't going well and what tools are available to me.
I think, and I'm going to speak from my experience in tech companies, I think that we are still very far away from at least what I thought we were getting closer to, which was a more inclusive, equitable, diverse room where people's voices are heard. And I very much think that it is still very much a white male dominated bro culture where it is not acceptable to show up and be vulnerable, where it is seen as a weakness, where when you question things and how it could impact human beings, it's brought back to the bottom line. And I'm not saying I'm not about business results, but I do think that you can balance those things and that being about the people actually helps the bottom line. And for a period of time, I really thought that we were getting closer. I was a founding member of Chief. I'm part of all of these organizations. And this may sound really pessimistic, but the more that I spent time behind those closed doors, the more depressing it got. And that there was a certain persona and a role you had to play to be in those rooms that felt very misaligned with my values. And I think that's what I mean by you had to mask up and then you had to kind of come clean and unfold in other rooms where it was safe, whether it was with my executive coach, whether it was with peers who were feeling the same, whether it was with colleagues who were experiencing the same in other organizations. And that's because it's unsafe to do that. And frankly, there's retaliation for it.
And so, what does masking look like for you? And how do you know what mask to put on? If there's someone listening to this who's felt the problem, but isn't sure quite how to navigate it.
I think it depends on the personas and the people in the room and how open are they to the conversation. And I think one thing, and I don't know how to explain this, and it's funny because I had a product manager once and he said, I just want to ask you questions about how you think. And I'm like, wait, what? And he's like, well, you just do things and I don't know how to do those things. And then I realized maybe, okay, I understand what he's getting at, but this is one of those examples where I'm able to read the room. I'm able to feel and kind of understand energies and where you can push on something and where there's okay, you got to stop there kind of feeling. So I think, look, 80% of what we say is nonverbal. You got to read the body language. You got to read the facial expressions, the tone, all that kind of stuff is going to give you data to understand, is this a conversation that you can have and push on? And I would say how you have those conversations and what questions you ask, it matters how you ask them. In my experience, and I've made these mistakes where I have felt very like righteous and, going after the justice and been maybe more direct, or it can sound accusatory, like you are not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You will not be opening up the conversation. But if you can lead from a place of curiosity and say, help me understand, ... Tell me more about ... It can potentially shift the conversation to de-escalate again and be able to have a more open, vulnerable one. If you are sensing, and I've been in conversations where, the other person may not value EQ, vulnerability, culture, right? That may be absolutely true. And to be honest, I have felt that we have over-rotated in that direction where we masquerade as people-first cultures, but behind closed doors, because the market is tough, because companies are not growing, different behaviors are actually happening in reality. And so my advice would be, we are in a really hard time. You have to be really honest with yourself about what are your values and which ones are in conflict with maybe what may be happening in your organization. You also have to be realistic. And I coach people all the time with what makes sense for me right now. And let's not think in rainbow la la land that I could just go and find another job. Let's be realistic that the market is super tight and really overqualified people are having a hard time finding new roles. And how much can you separate and create boundaries from things that are just work and things that affect you on a deeper level? And I think that was one of my biggest mistakes in my career, where I tied too much of my identity to my job, way too much, at the expense, not just of myself, of my kids, of my husband, of my family, of my friends, where feedback years later was, I did not recognize you. And so I think we can get caught up in the roles, the titles, the experiences, and what we've accomplished. But if you're not clear on what's important to you more holistically as a human, it gets really, really hard. And I know I deviated on a tangent here, but I think all of those things ladder back up into masks that we end up putting on because we may not be clear on who we are yet and what's important to us. And so then we're playing different roles based on who's around us and what's quote unquote expected.
It's a really interesting way to put it, right? So if we have trouble detangling our identity from our work persona, so to speak, maybe we have trouble taking the mask off, or we're unable to take it off, or it's stuck, or I'm trying to use analogies kind of riffing off what you shared. Is there one resource that someone could lean on if they want to get better at context switching and putting their mask off and learning to take it off, and just generally being able to do some of the things that you shared where you can ask tough questions from a place that allows people to be more open and accepting of them? Is there one resource you'd recommend?
I would say it may not be a resource, but just a thing to do that people told me at the time and I just wouldn't hear it. I think that we are so overscheduled and we're running in back-to-back meetings and our brains are, to your point, context switching, and they're constantly just like when your computer overheats and the battery's going. That's how I felt every day. And the reality is you do not have any space to actually think consciously about what question would I ask? Give me a break. Like you just can't. And so if there's one thing you do, you have to create that space for yourself. And I know the excuses because I had them. I don't have time. I can't miss that meeting. I have to be there. If I'm not, everything's going to go wrong. Whatever it is, right? The reality is the show goes on. If you left tomorrow, the show will go on. They will find someone else. They will figure it out. And so how can you protect your sanity? Even if it's 30 minutes, go take a walk, but step away from the computer, because when I now take that space, I'm coming up with more creative things. I'm thinking more strategically about what questions I want to ask. I'm having those light bulb moments where before I could not, I was just sprinting around the track nonstop, just sprinting. And no one is going to do that for you. Nobody. Stop waiting. You just have to do it yourself.
For the folks that you coach, what's their main challenge here? Because I think a lot of people know intuitively, I should do that. And at the same time, but I'm so busy and I'm for all the reasons that you probably hear. Is it a motivation thing? Is it a tactical thing? Is it something else? Like, what's the common reason why folks aren't able to do this?
It's what you said earlier. It's like you stay in your safe space of what you know.
And being busy and crossing things off the list feels safe.
Feels good. Feels good. Feels safe, right? Like I love crossing things. I got a list next to me. I love crossing things off my list. We don't like to do the hard things when they're uncomfortable and new and different.
So they need awareness that they're going outside their comfort zone. And that's actually what growth means. Sometimes it means doing less, and that's really uncomfortable.
That is exactly what I'm working on with one of my clients, somebody who moved up into a leadership role. And it is not uncommon to think about, what is my job now, right? And to your point earlier, what got you here doesn't get you there. And now how do you lean on your middle management to do the work that you were doing? And then what does that mean for you? It's uncomfortable. What's my value add now? I would mastered this other thing. I was so great at it. It's what got me promoted. Who am I now? And I think what's challenging is there's not really a safe space in your company. There's not. You may think I had best friends forged, but the reality is everyone is motivated and has a bias towards their role, their goals, whatever, right? And I think the value of having a safe space, a sounding board where you can be seen, where you can unravel, when you can talk about these things that are holding you back, there's so much to be said about that, because I am not judging you. I am not going to be doing your performance reviews. I am not going to be rethinking, should I have promoted this person? And those are the things that go through your head, whether you're new to your role from the outside or you just got promoted, because you're not wanting to give them reasons to question you. And it's hard to have those conversations in full if you want to constantly be seen as a high performer.
Hey, it's Andrew. Real quick, I wanted to interrupt our conversation with Tara to ask a short favor, which is to please take a second and like and subscribe on whatever platform you're enjoying this conversation on. If it's on YouTube, you can like and subscribe. If it's on Spotify, you can leave a review. All those things are important for the algorithms. They really like it. And as your host, I would really appreciate it too. Okay, enough from me. Let's get back to the combo. I think this is the number one challenge that new leaders face, and especially in tech, where there's no leadership training. You get promoted based on your capability, knowledge, or being a good IC. All of a sudden, you're in a new job. You don't know how to do that new job. You can't admit it to your boss because if you do, maybe they'll regret their decision. You can't admit it to your team because why would they listen to you and follow you if they know that you don't know what you're doing and you feel like a fraud? So you internalize it. And this is why for me, when I first got promoted into leadership, I didn't sleep well and I felt anxious all the time. And I struggled, like mental health wise, I struggled. So I'm curious, you get exposure to a ton of different leadership challenges. What's one that you see that causes folks who you coach to lose sleep over?
I think it's exactly what you just said, right? And it is, am I making the right call? Do I know what I'm doing? How am I being perceived? And not tying to what we talked about earlier, not knowing, am I on the right path? I'm just not quite sure. And I think it's hardest in a leadership role because let's be real, your CEO founders are not setting those things for you, right? They hired you for a reason. You have to make your own goals. You have to build your own plans. You have to hold yourself accountable. And it's really hard to know because it's just me, myself, and I up here, right? And so it is one of the toughest things. And to be honest, with what we've seen in the market, whatever company was doing training, it's gone. Where do you slash first in budgets? L&D, easy place. Because let's be honest, you're going to slash that before you cut a human. So if I'm looking at a budget, if I can kind of slash some funding before I cut somebody's job, I'm going to do that. But what is the impact of that, right? And most companies still weren't doing, I would say, the bare minimum, which is really unfortunate because what happens is it is a trickle down effect. And I think it really hurts everyone in the organization. And more importantly, let's just say that person doesn't work out. Now you have lost time. You're spending more money on recruiters. You got to figure it out. And I don't think we look at the totality of the lack of leadership experience, that like the totality of the impact of the lack of the experience and the knowledge in the tech industry. I'd love help quantifying that because it is massive. It's very expensive.
Right. Anytime you have someone who's in a high leverage position, if you're not maximizing that resource, it's a waste. And so you end up with these leaders who are on edge, uncomfortable, feeling a little imposter syndrome. I'm wondering if we can shine the light back on you here. You mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. Could you describe a time when you transitioned from being the number two to kind of being the number one? But is there another time that comes to mind when you felt imposter syndrome or maybe your work anxiety as a leader or otherwise might have flared up for you?
Yeah, I think it was my first board meeting.
Oh, I love this one. This is the most anxious I think I've ever been. Tell me more.
First of all, I'd never been in one. So what the hell do I know? I have no idea what to expect. I have thoughts, but nobody tells you this is what's going to happen. This is what they care about. Here's what good looks like for what you should even be sharing. Why is it like an underground? Why is it a black box? Why aren't we helping up and coming leaders? I don't know. But it was not just that it was my first, it was also that I was new to the company. When you're in a growth stage startup and you hire an exec, there's this big rah-rah, like, oh, this person's going to save the day. It's the silver bullet to this company. And so I didn't yet understand everything. I didn't know our customers yet. I didn't even understand the product fully. I didn't even understand the business completely. I just got there. And there was all this, there's high stakes, high expectations to be this savior and perform. It was the most stressed out I ever was. I remember, thank God I had again, dear friend to this day, I had an incredible CTO who was my partner in crime. And we just always kind of co-presented. Like everything was a team effort. And for me, I hated group projects in college because I was the one to carry them, but I do love a good partner who can carry their weight and riff with me and kind of bring value where I, kind of be the yin to my yang. And we were that. And for that, I am still grateful to this day. But at the same time, I kid you not, I think I looked at my calendar after the board meeting and I had all these chunks of prep and rehearsal. I think I like practiced my part for like 20 hours. I'm not even kidding. Like, I think I knew it by heart where you could just take the slides away and I had memorized it because I was so nervous. And it was in person because it was right before COVID started. And all of our board members flew in and I was like, oh my God.
How many people are there? Like, how many people are on this board?
At the time, let's say like the whole room was maybe like 10 to 12 people. It was less about the number and more about like who these people were. We're talking lead investors from top VC firms. There were probably, three or four VC firms and then, the support roles, if you will. That was insane. Obviously, afterwards, I felt great, but I felt like I put on a show. I had rehearsals every day prior. I was like, had my lines down. I performed and then I was exhausted. But for me, that was a huge moment of imposter syndrome. Not only had I not done it before, but I don't even know what this is. I don't even know what to expect going in here. I don't even know who these people are.
And so in retrospect, is that type of prep good? If you were coaching me and I was going to present to a board for the first time and I'm like, hey, I'm kind of not sure. I sort of know the talking points and I'm debating how much prep is too much prep. Looking back, do you think what you did was the right thing or would you coach someone today to do different?
You know what I wish I had done? I wish I had gone out to product leaders at other companies or a little bit ahead of me and said, if you are doing this for your first one, what's important? What do they care about? And instead I went inward and like went into a wind tunnel with my CTO. We figured out what we thought made sense, but that was so much harder.
Right. And so you're trying to translate capability speak to people who you don't even know, you don't know their background, you don't know what the cultural norms are, what kind of questions, are they tough questions? Is it just alignment? So that's the thing that might have been helpful.
I think I know how to speak in those terms. It was more about if you were the new, whatever, CPO, head of product at a company, what are they expecting in your first board meeting? They know that you're not going to have everything down, but what level of information do they care about? What do those investors care about the most at that moment in time? That shifts also with, size and stage.
And did you have to wait a long time to actually present your slides during the meeting?
Mine was the majority of it, which was also kind of crazy.
So I'm always curious. I was asking this because I was curious how you handle nerves. And for me, the nerves are always the greatest, like right before I get on. Once you kind of get going, once you get the first 30 seconds out of the way, for me anyways, the room slows down a little bit. But for you, what do you do to manage nerves when you rev high, like you might have been revving that day?
I'm the same where I think the more time I have before, the more time I have to be anxious.
Totally. Totally.
I'm the person who's like, let's just go first. Let's get it done.
I always raise my hand to go first when I had the choice. Always. Yeah.
I think once I get going also, it's fine, but I also tend to talk really fast. And so one of the things that I have to remember to do is breathe, which seems so simple, but that's it. It's very simple. And right beforehand, just kind of getting some alone time, even if you just go to the bathroom. I remember taking like a public speaking workshop when I worked at General Assembly because we got access to all their amazing events and courses. And this woman talked about, when you're about to do a big talk or get on stage or what have you, literally just go in the back, like jump up and down, get like some of this angst out of your body by moving it physically and breathing. And I think it really does help just to kind of move that energy around before you go into the room. So I think that helped. And also just breathing a little bit. And if you catch yourself getting nervous, talking fast, taking a breath, no one knows what's going on in your brain. And it's usually all in your own head. So you just have to kind of remember that.
I remember being so nervous the first time I presented to the board and go in the room, the board's there, never met anybody. So I go up, I shake somebody's hand. Hey, I'm Andrew. I work on growth. They, oh, nice to meet you, Andrew. I'm whatever their name was. There was someone else presenting to the board for the first time. And they were so nervous. They shook the same person's hand and said, hey, I'm Andrew. Nice to meet you. Their name was not Andrew. And so that happened. And I felt horrified for them because you could see it on their face that they realized that their name was not Andrew and that they just fucked up their own name because they were so nervous. And I looked at them and I was like, well, no matter what I do, it won't be that bad. And it was like all of a sudden my nerves went to zero. But I don't wish that on anybody. And that's a really tough thing.
But you know what? These people are not gods. They're just humans. Like they're just like us. And we create this giant weight on ourselves because we think there's a title. Even in my own teams, people would be afraid to talk to me because of my title. I'm like, who cares? Like, I'm just a person. I'm just interested in understanding what you have to say or get your feedback. And I think it's the same with boards and VC. They're just people.
it was always fear of judgment for me. Because I could talk to anybody, right? The same people who are on the board. If you met them afterwards at a bowling alley or something, you could shoot the shit with them for hours and probably not feel nervous. But for me, there was something about certain settings that made me feel really exposed and really judged. That's for me anyways. What are the feelings that come up for you?
I think that's probably it, just wanting to make a good impression. And I think in the moment, I probably thought, yeah, maybe they're judging my abilities or my capabilities. And what's hard is what is it? A couple hours every quarter. In hindsight, you can't judge somebody, but the problem is that's the only exposure they're really getting unless you're getting, mentoring hours or what have you and touching base in between. So I do think that that carries a lot of feelings that I did feel in the moment where it did need to be, it felt like I needed to be so performative. It felt like I had to be on top of my game because if you had a bad day, that's it for another quarter.
Right. And so in this context, you talked about to bring out peak performance, you went to the bathroom, you did some breathing, you gathered yourself. I'm curious, in just a typical day-to-day, week-to-week operating system for yourself, are there other habits and other rituals that you use to bring out peak performance?
Yeah, I'm really cranky and I'm not my best self if I don't exercise every morning. Like I have to move my body. Even if I'm sore and I'm tired, just go for a walk. If it's like a rest day, if I don't, and there are days when I don't, there's a huge impact on my performance and my mood. So I know that about myself. I also know that maybe it's like as you get older, like I cannot function well if I don't get a certain number of hours of sleep. Even Monday night, I hosted this amazing executive women's dinner local to me with a subset of people from Chief and other executives I know. And it was amazing, but it was also a Monday night. And I did not get a lot of sleep going into Tuesday. And I was not at my best yesterday. So I would say it's movement in the morning, it's enough sleep. I don't know whoever says you need like 8 to 9 hours. I'm like, I don't know who these people are, but they must not have hard jobs or kids. So that's impossible. Definitely not kids. My co-founder likes to say that I have, I start my second job around like 5, 6 p.m. as an Uber driver until about 9:30 p.m. with all their activities. So it's just impossible. And then I do think paying attention to what you're putting in your body matters. And I know these sound like basics and like everybody's doing the same things, but the reality is it works. And I think a lot of people, and I did this. So when I was in these really high pressure, very hard environments, with a lot of stress, I think the mistake that I made was I mimicked that in my workouts. And I maybe didn't prioritize sleep as much. And I did the high intensity CrossFit, like basically like the hardest things you could do in workouts. I did that. And then the hardest thing you could do in your job, I did that. And then my body was like constantly stressed. So also understanding and listening to what does your body need at that moment. And maybe it wasn't pushing it to its max where you're lying on the floor, but you could still get a workout in, move your body and feel good about yourself and be at peak performance. So you can also overdo it. I've done that. Don't recommend. I also probably live in the wrong state. I live in northern New Jersey outside of New York City. Like sunshine matters to me. And I think that if I need to get fresh air and get just like a little bit of sun to feel like, okay, I've reset. Maybe I'd like back to back to back, even just 10 minutes, get some air and kind of go back to it. And I think there are times where maybe you don't have a moment to do that. I love those acupressure mats. I'll just like get on my floor and I just feel like
The
it just
ones that you lie
resets
on or just for your
that you
feet?
lie
Or...
on. Yeah, it's got like the little, I don't know if they're knobs or like they're kind of spiky.
Yep, I can picture it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it really does help. Again, like 5, 10 minutes just to kind of reset and like you feel a little bit different. Again, breathing also helps. We don't breathe during the day. We're just running. So it's probably the same thing you hear from, influencers and whatever, but there's a reason people are talking about these things. They do matter. And what I am not saying is do all the things, right? Get your nutrition perfect, walk 10,000 steps a day, do your workouts, get enough. It's too much and it just stresses us out. Just do what works for you.
And what about on the flip side? Somebody's having a rough day. They had a tough meeting, a tough conversation, things aren't going their way, whatever it is, they're revving high. What are some things that can help them reset so that it doesn't become something that they can't put down that infects other moments of their day or other parts of their life?
First of all, I would say this is very much dependent on the individual and how you process these things. Some people need to process verbally. Some people need alone time and space to really go in, be introspective and think about, and process, then come back with, okay, I understand now. So I would say you need to really understand how you process these experiences. I would also say, regardless of who you are, it's okay to just take time. Let's say something bad happens, pretty big in the day. Don't push through it. I've been there. I've done it. It's just a bad idea. It's okay to cancel meetings. It's okay to say, I'm not feeling well. I need to take the rest of the day. It'll be a game changer. And then do whatever makes you feel good when you're going through this. For me, I need to call people and talk to my inner circle and process everything like verbal diarrhea. I just need to just put it all out there and then they can spit it back and we can talk through it. That's how I am. I'm not going to say, go do that. You have to figure out what makes sense for you. But I would say, don't power through these things. Sit in your emotions, feel them, understand them, think about what's happening and how it's impacting you, and then figure out, what do you want to do about it?
Anything that we haven't covered that you want people who are listening to this to take away from our conversation? Anything that's been unsaid?
I think there's a lot of pressure on everybody to do certain things, to be certain things, to live a certain way, to get certain jobs, titles, work in these fancy companies. And I think what's unsaid is, I was there too. I think you have to make sure you understand what's important to you despite all of that. And it may be, I'm just going to call it non-traditional. I don't think that's traditional, by the way, but I think we are made to feel that way because what we say is success. We have like defined success in this country and in this world. And that is one view of success. And I think what was most helpful to me and my one takeaway would be, define success for you. What does success look like in your life for you as an individual versus what society or your manager or peer or friend or family member is telling you? And be clear on that, because that is what's going to drive a lot of your decisions, your behavior, and where you work and who you are.
Start with the end in mind. It was your same advice, actually, for when you're starting a new role, to get on the same page with your CEO to try to get some clarity. Love that. For folks who are listening, who want to connect with you, work with you, learn more about you, where do they go?
They can find me on LinkedIn, pretty active there. It's probably the easiest way.
Awesome. We'll put a link to all that stuff in the show notes. Thank you for coming on and sharing your game and being vulnerable with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.